So when we left off, Japan had just invaded China, and let's just say China was struggling, and badly, due mainly to its poor organisation, lack of weapons, foreign support, and the awful training, which in most cases was the government just giving a Chinese peasant a gun, some ammo, and pointing them to the front. This obviously caused heavy Chinese casualties, leading to an angry population. Perfect ground for a certain group to mass recruit recruits in. Betraying the nationalists as incompetent and corrupt, they went around rural villages and soon they began to increase rapidly in size. Now whilst this was all happening in China, Taiwan was experiencing something very different. No sooner as the news reached Taipei that Qing China had lost the war against the Japanese and that they were to be handed over to them, the island's residents were like, no, and so they declared independence as the Republic of Formosa, with a really badass flag. However, the Japanese refused to recognise this, and so they invaded and then annexed the island. With Taiwan now under their rule, they now had to deal with two types of Taiwanese. The natives, who had largely not really experienced Chinese rule, living in their villages in the rural rainforested mountains. They were very known for killing people who got too close to their villages, and the people living in the big cities who were very independence-minded, and although had adapted to Chinese rule, they were largely neglected by the Qing government, leading to a population that largely distrusted the Japanese, resulting in acts of sabotage during the early years of Japanese rule and a heavy Japanese military presence. Soon, a process of Japanization occurred, as people were slowly indoctrinated into thinking that they were always Japanese and were forced to pledge their allegiance to the emperor. Over the next few decades, the Japanese would begin a forced assimilation of all native Taiwanese, and the island was then industrialized. During the new China-Japan War, Taiwan was used as a base to invade China, and many Taiwanese were forcibly taken to help fight against the Chinese. As the war dragged on for years, more and more reports of atrocities committed by the Japanese began to shift the world's attention and opinion in favour of the Chinese, and soon the US, Japan's largest oil supplier, decided this oil should be cut off as Japan began to expand even more by taking even more parts of China and even taking French Indochina. Eventually, the Japanese would attack America at Pearl Harbor in Hawaii and would enter the war against the Japanese. With American support, the Chinese could better resist. After 4 more years of bloody fighting, not one, but 2 nukes on Japan occurred, and the Soviet entry into the war in the east caused the Japanese Empire to quickly collapse and surrender, forcing it to give up its empire including Taiwan, which would become Chinese once again. Upon arriving, Chinese troops looted and burnt whole towns to the ground. In an effort to intimidate the local Taiwanese, most of the Chinese nationalist troops saw themselves as superior to the locals and their former Japanese customs. But there was still one final region of China that was occupied by a foreign power, this time not by an enemy but an ally of China, the Communist Soviet Union. During the collapse of the Japanese puppet state of Manchukuo, the Soviets took the region and forced the Chinese to recognize Tanzania, once a part of Qing China, as Soviet territory, along with Mongolia as an independent country. In exchange, Manchuria would be reaffirmed as Chinese and handed over to them. Instead, it was handed over to the Communist Chinese, led by Mao Zedong. Chiang was pretty angry that the Soviets did this, and after failed peace talks with Mao and his communists, he would rush his troops into Manchuria, capturing the important cities, but failing to dislodge the communist forces in the rural countryside. Soon, the communists took advantage of this and cut off the supplies of these nationalist troops. They soon overwhelmed the large garrisons of nationalist troops, while causing others to defect. Soon the situation got out of control as communist forces advanced further south, forcing the nationalists to retreat and leave city after city to the communists. Meanwhile, on Taiwan, an incident rapidly escalated as people took to the streets in protest. Soldiers fired onto the crowd, and in what became known as the White Terror, the regime of Chiang would execute numerous people he perceived as enemies to the government. 2 years later, with the communists on the brink of victory, the last remaining nationalists would either flee northwest, the Xinjiang province, to start primarily an Islamic insurgency against the communists, south to northwestern Burma, or where the vast majority and Chiang himself went, to the island of Taiwan, where the old Chinese government was located to. On the mainland, Mao Zedong proclaimed the People's Republic of China. While Chiang and his nationalist forces continued to proclaim that he owned mainland China as well, the last of the forces on the mainland began to collapse, and Mao Zedong had nearly reunited all of what he saw as China. From there, he took over Tibet in 1950 and captured Hainan Island as well. From here, the war shifted more from a battlefield to a recognition battle. The only thing that the two could agree on was that there was only one China, but they were it. And while neither could settle this issue, despite multiple skirmishes between the two, they forced different countries to recognise one of the two Chinas, the People's Republic or the Republic of China. At the end of 1949, this became a Cold War issue as the Soviet Communist bloc recognised the mainland PRC, while the rest of the world continued to recognise the ROC. The PRC began to try to persuade other countries to see things their way, and gradually, as the years went on, more and more Western countries recognised the PRC, from Britain in 1950 to France in 1964 to Canada in 1970. However, easily the biggest blow for Taiwan and victory for mainland China was the following year, when the United Nations kicked them out, replacing them with the PRC. The US President, Richard Nixon, also visited the mainland during this period, and what followed was even more recognition from the Western and wider world for the mainland. In 1975, Chiang Kai-shek died, and Taiwan slowly began to change. In 1979, the United States recognised the PRC, and by today, Taiwan only has recognition from just 14 countries, places like the Vatican, Eswatini, or Swaziland, and Paraguay being the only countries in 3 whole continents of loads of countries that recognise Taiwan. The latest recognition of mainland China happening in December of 2021, when Nicaragua recognised the mainland. But going back to 1975, when Chiang died, Taiwan began to change. You see, before Chiang died, the island was a military dictatorship led by, of course, him. The native Taiwanese population were at best ignored, as Chiang's mainland Chinese co-patriots held all the positions of power. But with his death, native Taiwanese people began to protest again, hoping that with his death, the government would listen to their demands. This was met by the government with mass arrests, intimidation, and even outright disappearances, as the island's authoritarian characteristics didn't die just yet. However, as native Taiwanese eventually began to take jobs and a new generation of mainland Chinese descendants who were born in Taiwan began to do the same, restrictions on the various languages of native Taiwanese people and political gatherings were lifted. After reports, Taiwanese troops opened fire on unarmed Vietnamese boat refugees who reached Taiwanese shores, there was widespread outrage across the world, and eventually, foreign pressure finally ended the 38-year-long martial law on the island, although a climate of fear and some censorship continued to be until around the mid-1990s. The point is, the island was not a full-on democracy until around this time, and with elections, the PRC attempted to try to get a pro-unification candidate into office. The country would fire missiles off the coast of Taiwan. However, this only made the Taiwanese people vote for the candidate the Chinese government didn't want to win, only inflaming tensions. The crisis ended when the US under President Bill Clinton sent aircraft carriers into the region. In 2000, China made it abundantly clear that independence means war. This again backfired, as another candidate that Beijing didn't like took power before eventually getting re-elected in 2004. Today's Taiwanese politics largely is between the pro-unification Kuomintang Nationalist Party, with mainly older voters, and the pro-independence Democratic Progressive Party, with mainly younger voters. This is very much an oversimplification though, as both sides know deep down what the average Taiwanese person wants: peace, and the only way both can secure this is the status quo. If they tried to reunify with the mainland, there'd be mass protests, which most likely would turn to riots. If they outright declared independence, they would trigger a war with China. The only question now though is how long can this status quo conflict keep going on for? Until then, Taiwan will continue to be locked outside of the United Nations in a very dangerous situation. The biggest people that suffer are the people of both territories but do not know what this conflict is about or how it happened in the first place, causing not only panic for them, but their companies they represent as well.
中国只有一个，海峡两岸是一体的。我始终为自己是一个中国人而感到骄傲。我作为一个中国人， 在国外活动时，由于言行上的过失，对公司、对两岸网友的情感造成了伤害，我感到非常非常的抱歉，也很愧疚。我决定终止目前中国一切的活动，认真反省，再次的向大家道歉，对不起。
I hope you found this video informative and interesting. This is the last video of 2021 I'm doing, obviously, so hopefully we can have a better year next year for the channel and everybody in general. Anyway, thanks for watching.